Texans get a chance to weigh in on the border wall as the feds seek public input.
Biden said there would be no more border walls in his administration. Unfortunately, Congress had already allocated money for that.
How the plan has environmentalists along the border working to win support. Governor Abbott's promise to keep the lights on in Texas gets its first test from a winter storm. Why there's still a push to get the state to do more. Texas homeowners struggling with foundation failures, looking for help.
We need a commission. We need oversight. We need unbiased oversight in our profession.
We look into a state commission shut down by lawmakers, what leaders say the industry needs now.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle, and this week I'm joining you from my home studio. Working from home, or at least staying home, was the reality for many Texans this week as we dealt with a major winter ice storm. 2 days of sub-freezing temperatures marked the first major test of improvements to the electric grid passed by state lawmakers. For most Texans, the lights stayed on. Some people did lose power, but the problems were mostly localized issues. We're talking about things like trees or ice on power lines. Most of those were fixed in a matter of hours. The grid avoided problems like the one that led to wide-ranging blackouts a year ago. This time, electric supply far exceeded demand. Governor Abbott touted the state's preparations, highlighting changes implemented after last year's storm.
As compared to last year, Texas has about 15% more power generation capacity. There is also more reserve power available than last year. Unlike last year, winterization has been required for power generators, and there's been about 99% of those power generators passed inspection. Last year, some generators were not available because of maintenance operations during the course of the winter storm. This year, more generators are online because they were required to do maintenance either before or after a winter season. Also, more natural gas facilities are designated as critical infrastructure to ensure operation during a winter storm.
Gas producers have not been required to weatherize to the extent that power generators have, but they weathered this freeze without major problems. Still, there are concerns that more needs to be done to prepare for a serious storm. Maggie Glenn joins us with a closer look.
While the Railroad Commission's deadline for critical gas suppliers to weatherize isn't until much later this year, the RRC has repeated messaging this week that, quote, 98% of the facilities they've visited since the fall have winterized. But we don't know how much gas those suppliers they inspected account for, and the specifics of winterization aren't clear.
If there's an inspection of a restaurant to make sure it's up to health standards, that health inspector knows exactly what he or she is looking for when they walk into that commercial kitchen, right? They've got a checkbox. I need to make sure this is done and this is done and the other thing is done, and they're checking through it. And the restaurant knows this is the standard I have to meet. Why would we not have a similar system in place for an energy source that we are very reliant on as of now in the winter time, particularly?
Todd Staples with the Texas Oil and Gas Association, though, pushed back against criticism and says suppliers are weatherizing on their own. Again, we don't have any official documentation of that happening and won't until the deadline later this year, but he says there are other things these suppliers are doing to prep their systems for freezing temps and why it's not cause for concern when we see production drop during cold snaps.
I was in Midland yesterday talking with some operators. They have crews that they're renting hotel rooms for to put them out to be closer to their assets to keep them moving. Their crews have additional supplies on their trucks. They're having additional personnel come in before their shift begins in order to respond. Even so, we expect some fluctuation in production, but the storage that we have in Texas is the key. We have 544 billion cubic feet of storage. And so that means we have ample gas available. We range from 23 to 25 billion cubic feet per day in production. Now let's put that in contrast to how much power generators use on a typical winter day. They use 4 BCF a day. So we're producing 25, they use 4. That means 80% of gas goes to other purposes.
Doug Lewin points out, though, if we see production dip for days at a time, that's when we'll run into problems. Josh, back to you.
Thanks, Maggie. Texas Democratic lawmakers were vocal in the days leading up to the storm. Hays County Democrat Erin Zwiener leads the Environment and Energy Industry Caucus in the Texas House. She says long-term issues still need to be addressed.
So first of all, the question isn't whether or not we're going to see a catastrophic blackout this winter storm. The question is whether or not Texans can rely consistently on the grid to keep the lights and the heat on every winter. If we have a grid where half of our winter power depends on the availability of natural gas, we have to take steps to make sure that natural gas is available. The cold front we saw a few weeks ago, where the power stayed on for almost everyone, still resulted in plummeting natural gas production. We have to invest in the weatherization of these wells, and they have similar wells in Wyoming, Montana, places that are much colder than Texas. So if we're going to rely on natural gas, we have to weatherize it just like they do up there.
This storm and the response leading up to it come just weeks before voting begins in the Texas primary election, and we're already getting a picture of where the candidates stand in the top statewide races. The University of Houston Hobby School of Public Affairs released a new poll of likely primary voters in both parties. The race for governor seems to be set for both Republicans and Democrats. Governor Greg Abbott has a solid lead in the poll with support from 62% of likely primary voters. Allen West is his closest challenger with 14% support. Don Huffines is pulling 7% in the poll. Beto O'Rourke leads the way for the Democrats. No other Democrat has more than 2% support in the poll. The Republican race for lieutenant governor is also looking like a done deal. Dan Patrick has support from 61% of likely voters in the poll. No one else has more than 4%. It's a little cloudier for the Democrats. Mike Collier has a double-digit lead in the poll over Carla Braley and Michelle Beckley, but he only has 24% support, far below what he needs to avoid a runoff. Nearly 60% of Democratic primary voters are undecided in that race. Undecided voters will also play a huge role in the Democratic primary for Attorney General. The poll shows Rochelle Garza with a slim lead over former Galveston Mayor Joe Jaworski. Civil rights attorney Lee Merritt is running third in the poll. But the poll shows none of the candidates breaking 15% support. A full 60% of likely voters in the primary say they're undecided. But the hottest race in the primary may be the race for second place Republican in the campaign for Attorney General. Incumbent AG Ken Paxton holds the lead. When it comes to Republican voters who say they definitely plan to vote in the primary, 44% back Paxton. That's good, but not enough to avoid a runoff. Louis Gohmert and George P. Bush are neck and neck in the race to make a potential runoff. Both of them lead former Texas Supreme Court Justice Eva Guzman in the poll. 21% of likely Republican primary voters say they're undecided. Early voting starts on Valentine's Day. Election Day is March 1st. Texans get a new chance to weigh in on the border wall, why the feds are asking for public input, and why environmentalists see this as a big opportunity. Foundations failing in a Texas neighborhood.
You do not see it until you have a problem. But if you have a problem, then your door is not going to open, and your house is going to crack, and the windows are not going to be able to open.
Our team investigates the problems and what you need to know before buying a home. Texas ramps up efforts to let you manage more information online, but critics say one important option is missing from this app: